Okay, so what you're going to need is obviously your Gameboy Advance to start with, and you're going to need these extra pieces. I'm going to be using a rechargeable battery from a Nintendo DS Lite. You'll need a charging board. This is a TP4056. You can get these off eBay. You will also need a diode. This is a 1N4001 diode. A wireless charger receiver. This is of type A or B USB. It doesn't really matter since we're going to be taking that off anyway. Some tools you might need. I'm going to be using a pair of plastic flush cutters. You're going to need a wire stripper, which trim some wires. You might need a file at some point just to get rid of some edges. You'll need some solder, and you'll need some flux. You'll also need a soldering iron, and lastly, kind of obvious, you'll need some wire to do the soldering and connecting it all up. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is take apart the Gameboy Advance itself so we can get access to the board inside. This is a aftermarket housing that I have and that I'm going to use. I would recommend either grabbing an aftermarket one for quite cheap, or if the shell you're using is quite beat up, then that's fine to use. I just don't like to use the OEM ones if I'm going to be modifying, trimming and cutting up the shell, because this is kind of irreversible. So once we're inside, we can set apart all of the buttons, the shoulder bumpers, the sliders and everything else that will just fall out, and then we can go ahead and remove the board. Now, one thing you might have noticed already about this particular board that I'm using is, I'm going to take it out here, let's just set that to the side. It's missing the terminals for the battery here. I've already removed these because this board was used in a previous rechargeable battery mod, so I've just removed that for now so I can use this board and don't have to potentially ruin another working GBA board. Right, so this is where we're going to be doing some irreversible kind of modifications to the shell. So again, like I said, make sure it's an aftermarket shell or one that you're happy to potentially ruin. So if we just get the shell and the board back in, and probably also the other half too. In fact, no, just the other half for now. Let's just sit it in as it normally would. So our issue is whatever battery you choose, the Nintendo DS Lite one, this USG 003, it fits in kind of okay-ish. Zoom in here. There is the only part that kind of causes any issues is these kind of like little bits of plastic that stick out. I know you can see it, but I just wanted it focused. There we go. So we're gonna have to trim them off. So I think first thing I'll do is just give them a trim for now, just so we can start to see how things line up. So just get rid of these posts, again as close to that plastic as you can. So you can see there, let's try and take that off. That's one. And the second. Okay, so that's completely flat, and as it sits in here against the foam padding, it actually sits quite nice. It can kind of freely slide about, which means that it isn't overlapping on the shell. But the problem is where the AA's would go, this backing obviously sits in that slot, so it's kind of in the way, so we're going to have to get rid of that. So that's the next part that I'm going to get rid of in order to accommodate this battery. So I'm going to set that to the side for now. and get to work on this shell. So I'm going to pop out the terminals here. What you would normally do is just push down in here, but also you kind of have to push it away over a lip. However, these aftermarket shells aren't great, so it's kind of just a push it and force it, and eventually it'll pop out like that. I suppose you could keep that if you wanted to for any other shells that come and they've got a corroded compartment. So this bottom kind of piece, that's the first thing I need to get rid of. So again, with the pair of plastic / metal flush cutters, I'm going to go to work on this. Okay, so let's turn our focus to this charge board that we have here. You should see at this end there are 4 terminals. The inner 2 are for the power coming from the battery, and the outer 2 are for then routing that power to whatever device that we want to supply. So in this case, the Gameboy Advance board. So I just got 2 wires pre-cut here, a black and a red one. I'm going to use the red for positive and the black for the negative. I'm going to start off with just wiring up the battery to start with, just because we don't need to bother with any diode at the moment. So I'm just going to put some solder on these contact points just so they're ready. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this around. Try not to block it too much. Okay, just like that. So now we can go and attach the wires. So again, black's going to go to negative, red's going to go to positive. So let's get them kind of lined up ready. Now ideally, that's where my tweezer's gone. Ideally I would do this the other way around because left-handed and whatever. I think I'm going to trim them down. They don't need to be that long, so okay, so they seem to be, yeah, they seem to be okay. So where this will go is kind of just sit on top of the battery, I think, maybe like this. And then I'll probably just put a bit of Kapton tape just to keep it down. I'm not too bothered about the charge port at this point. Obviously this idea is a wireless charging mod, so I could just kind of hook that straight into there, to be fair. I might do that in all honesty, but we'll see how it goes for now. So with this being the power from the battery, it doesn't really need to be this long. So again, I could really trim these down, but these are going to go, obviously, positive is going to go into the positive terminal and negative into the negative. Okay, so what I managed to do is get, let's get this into camera. I managed to get 2 bits of solder onto the contacts of the battery. It kind of goes without saying, this is obviously quite dangerous to be messing with soldering iron and a battery. Do not puncture it, do not hold it too long. I just put a little bit of flux on both the contacts and heated up the pad a little bit, then applied some solder, and just a tiny little bit, doesn't need a lot. So now I'm going to get the wires from the board and hook them up to the battery itself. So okay, got the red on, positive. Probably did a little bit too much length on the black, so let's just trim that down. So as you can see, it's sat in here. The board will kind of sit down like this, and then I'll need a wire from the out terminals to come over to the battery terminal of the GBA. So probably a good inch and a little bit of wire there needed. But obviously in between the positive wire, so from the positive out to the positive terminal on the GBA, there needs to be a diode that is going to be our kind of regulator. It'll step it down from, I think this board outputs, I think it's either 5 or 3.7 volts, and that needs to be down towards like 3 volts for the GBA. Okay, so now what we need to do is get, and I kind of did this off camera just because it was so super fiddly. I've wired in the diode onto 2 pieces of wire. What I'm going to do is probably wrap this in a bit of Kapton tape just to keep it insulated. And again, I wish it would focus. There you go. And what you should notice is at the end of the diode, there will be a grey bar around one end. This end should be pointing towards the terminals on the Gameboy Advance. So, like I said, I did that off camera, but it's pretty straightforward to do. You just need to solder it in. And then it's going to go in. I'm going to plug into the positive terminal, which is going to be the top one. And then, like I said, the grey band is going to be pointing or on the side of that of the terminal on the GBA. Right, that seems okay. Okay, so red wire is going to go to the out terminal, which is kind of just down here. I think I'll go ahead and zoom this in a bit more. Okay, so I think what I'll do actually is just take this separate, because I need to put some solder on the pads here. So let's just get a bit of... Okay, perfect. And then just to prevent any issues, any solder seeping through and touching the battery, just going to put on some Kapton tape. That way when we set it on and solder on the wires, it's not going to, any of the solder isn't going to seep through and touch the battery. So Okay. There we go. Okay, so I suppose at this point the battery's wired up, the charge board's wired up, and it's all connected to the terminals on the GBA. So we can turn it on and give it a try, I suppose. So I think what I'll do is just try to hold everything in place. It is in the off position to start with. Go ahead, turn it on. I think this might be a bit of a dodgy power switch. There we go. Okay, so we got it to boot, which means everything's working as it should be. But obviously now I want to be able to have it add the wireless charging ability, because obviously I don't want to be taking the battery cover off to get access to this charge board to then plug in a micro USB. Okay, so now we're at the part where we can start to attach the wireless receiver. So just as a kind of bit of proof, not that it needs proving, but here's a wireless charger, here's my iPhone XS. You can see there it's charged it. So it's plugged in, it's working, and what I think I'll go ahead and do is take our wireless charger receiver that we have here. I'm going to plug it into the charge board because it uses the same type B connector. I think it is, does it say on here anywhere? It doesn't. But it's a micro USB anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and plug that in just so we can get a kind of idea of, yes, this is going to work, which at this stage is probably, well, it's not too late because it still works without. Right, so this should start charging, the light should come on the charge board as soon as this wireless receiver goes on the pad. So let's just give it a try. You have to stretch a few things here. Okay, the light's on for the charge pad, but there is no light on. There we go. So I've obviously had to stretch it over a bit, but the charge light's on, so it's charging the battery from the wireless receiver. Perfect. So the issue is now, this is quite large, so I'll move that out of the way. This is obviously very large. It needs to be within, I think, 5mm of the wireless pad itself to charge, so there can't be too much in the way. This is the back plate, the battery, and you can obviously see here, this entire device is bigger than this. So my plan is, and this is the side that has to face out, so it's going to have to kind of be attached on the back of the board. So that shouldn't be too bad if it was to sit like that. I think, you know what, I was going to take this apart, the wireless receiver, and solder in to the terminals here, but I think just having it plugged into the USB, micro USB, is going to be fine enough really. What I do need to do though is take this apart, because the pad inside, the wireless charging part inside, isn't the entire surface area of the wireless charging kind of case. So I would say be very careful with this. What you're going to need to do is kind of just split it open really. So might just disconnect that, even though it was a pain to get in. Okay, so now this should be a lot more slimline and fit almost perfectly in here. So let's just see how this fits. Okay. Like that, and we can fold this over. That is fit perfectly. So now, kind of the tricky part maybe, getting this plugged back in. Because what I have realised actually before I plug that in is the case is going to need to be put back on. So let's get the case and all the buttons back in. Right, okay, all the screws are in. Now comes the kind of difficult part of trying to get this battery cover with the wireless adapter plugged in this small space. It shouldn't be too hard actually. Yeah, it's not too bad. And there we go, that's plugged in. Let's go ahead and put the battery cover on. That needs to fold in a bit more. Bulges a little bit, but I'm gonna. I think I know where that might be. Okay. So it does kind of bulge a little bit at the side, and I know exactly what that is. However, let's just test this. And again, I can't really check to see if it is charging, but I imagine. I wonder how I'm going to check this now. I suppose it is one of those situations where maybe I've just got to turn it on, let the battery completely drain. So at least it works. Let's just put that on. Yeah, so I can't really show you, well actually I probably can, let's get this. So you can see there's the charge light on, it's touching the back plate, and obviously when this is closed, I can confidently say that that is charging. So that to me is a wirelessly charging Game Boy Advance with a DS Lite battery mod. That, let's get it switched back on if it will. I think I need to have a look at this power switch. Yeah, perfect.